So I know I'm a little late to the party with this particular video, but rather than making content on it, I've actually been enjoying Borderlands 3 myself. Now, when this game first came out, one of the main things that I was interested in was the system requirements for it. Of course, any PC enthusiast that's looking at a new game should be focusing on things like that. It was the minimum specs that really caught my eye with this though. They're calling for an FX-8350 or an i5-3570, depending on which camp you happen to own, 6 gigs of RAM, which is an oddly specific total, I have to admit, and either an HD 7970 or an NVIDIA GeForce GTX 680. They don't actually tell you what kind of experience you should expect when you have that kind of, frankly, older hardware. So sitting next to me is exactly what I've got set up. An All-Amd minimum spec gaming setup to test how Borderlands 3 actually performs when you're running the minimum spec. Now, before we get into actual gameplay footage and seeing what this actually all looks like, let's go over the parts list real quick here. The processor is the only thing I'm cheating a little bit on. It's an FX-8370, but I'm not overclocking it. I'm just letting it use its natural boost clock algorithms to do its own thing. Cooling that processor is my AMD Wraith Prism heatsink. It's just the easiest heatsink I had to install. Come on, it doesn't have to be anything special here. The motherboard of choice here is the Asus Sabertooth 990FX Revision 2.0 motherboard. It was a solid bit of kit in its day, even if the FX processor itself wasn't particularly solid. The memory we're using is a 2x4 gigabyte kit of Avexir Raiden DIMMs. These are clocked at 2133 megahertz with their XMP profile, and they have this cool little lightning effect going across the top of them, if that's something that you're into at all. Now for the graphics card, we have an XFX branded HD 7970. This is a non-gigahertz edition card, but I am overclocking the graphics card about 75 megahertz on the core and about 25-50 megahertz on memory. I forget off the top of my head. I'll leave an annotation or something if anyone cares. Now for storage, I am only using a single hard drive. This is an old Kingston HyperX SSD, 240 gigs. It doesn't need to be anything special. I'm just doing some performance evaluation. And powering the whole thing is my old Rosewill Valens power supply. This is an 80+ gold semi-modular power supply. Got a relatively quiet fan on it, and it's never had any issues as far as my use case has been concerned with dirty power delivery or malfunctioning or anything like that. It's a solid power supply. So now without further ado, I guess we'll go ahead and bring the camera on in so you all can see what the gameplay footage looks like. Oh, really quick, before we get to the gameplay, the display that I'm using, really basic display. It's just an Acer P215H. Anyway, on to gameplay. All right, so we are loaded into the game as you can see. Now, I'm aware that this game has an in-game FPS counter, but I am using Fraps instead just because it can display the numbers a bit larger than the in-game counter does, and I want to make sure that I can blow this up big enough so that we can see real-time FPS numbers with this game. I'm going to be playing on my main, which is my Mose, as you can see right here. So let's go over some, oh, that's not the right button. Let's go over the visual settings that we're going to be using. Now, I have done some previous testing with this game. We're going to be playing this on the low quality preset, with the only change being Fidelity FX sharpening being turned on. The reason for this, even going up to medium settings, you're not really getting a particularly fluid gaming experience at 1080p, honestly. There are sections of this game where it's dipping down into the high to mid 20s, and that's really not a great experience for a title like this that has a lot of fast-paced movement. We want to get the highest FPS that we can get using presets. This is not going to be a performance optimization guide. I will actually link down in the video's description to the hardware unboxed optimization guide that they did for this game, where they tested all kinds of hardware and what the gameplay will look like there. But just to show you all the settings we're working with here, we are using DirectX 11 because DirectX 12 is still a broken pile of garbage. Overall quality preset is set to low, of course. Now what that sets for us is FX anti-aliasing. Fidelity FX sharpening is normally turned off here, but we have turned it on because there's really not any sort of noticeable performance loss in turning this on versus off, and the game just looks better for it. All of the motion blur is turned off. Even if I had this on higher settings, I would turn motion blur off. That just doesn't look good to me. Texture streaming is set to medium. Anisotropic filtering is 2x. Material complexity and shadows are medium. Draw distance, environmental detail are low. Terrain detail is medium. Foliage, character detail, and ambient occlusion is low. Volumetric fog and screen space reflections are off. So this is about as bare bones as it gets for a Borderlands 3 experience. But we're still going to see what it looks like in terms of our overall FPS, fluidity of the gaming experience, and whether or not the loss in fidelity winds up amounting to anything in terms of being able to enjoy this game. So let's jump in and find some spoiler-free content to test this game out with. All right, so we have gotten to the Forgotten Basilica. This is the first vault battle that you encounter in the game, and I've already done the story mission version of this, so you will not see any storyline spoilers for this section of the game. Just sitting here staring at all these floating sprite thingies in the air, we're looking at about 73 FPS on average. Texture fidelity for the gun admittedly does look less sharp than what I'm used to seeing on my main rig, which is obviously extremely powerful compared to this one. But I don't really suspect that in typical gameplay scenarios this is going to really make all that much of a difference. And really, even just looking at things like the vending machines, and let's go into the inventory here and get a close-up look at, let's look at this gun up close, Cloud Kill. So even with the textures turned way down, this gun still looks really damn cool on this machine. Like there are some noticeable differences between looking at the gun on this machine and looking at it on my daily driver rig, but this really isn't anything that I would complain about. And it still looks better than Borderlands 2. I mean, that much is likely to be a given throughout. So let's jump down and see if we can't fight us a vault creature, huh? The Rampager, kinda awesome. Much more intense fight than you would think, but yeah, let's just see what happens here. Now, I chose this fight because, as you can see, there's a lot of particle effects that are going on. The ceiling winds up collapsing a bunch. He shoots a bunch of fireballs all over the place, and then when his phase change, when his what do you call it? Yeah, when he switches over to another phase, there's a lot of those little floaty things that are all over the place. So, yeah, there's this is what I would call a pretty decent test. And what we're seeing so far is we're maintaining sort of low to mid 50 FPS on average, and I'm not really finding it incredibly challenging to play the game. By the way, I am definitely not playing at my best right now. So yeah, I'm aware that my gameplay is not Killer 6 or Jolt's Dude levels of eliteness here, but bear with me. All right, so we're getting into phase 2, where he's gone from radiation damage to corrosive damage. Hop into Iron Bear here. Then hop out, get an explosion going. All right, and we're down. So let's get some more deepuses in on him. Yeah, we're still hovering in a very comfortable FPS range. Yes, this is not a full 60 FPS experience. And frankly, with hardware this old, I don't really think anyone should have expected that, to be honest with you. Even as well scaled as this game seems to be across a lot of different hardware configurations. But this is still largely a very playable experience, and I honestly have no complaints with this. If this actually was still my daily driver computer, and this is all I had to play this game with at low settings for 1080p, I'm very happy with this experience. Oh geez, oh geez. All of the fireballs, every single one, aimed right at me. All right. Oh yeah, frame rates dropped down to the 40s there. That was a little intense for this hardware, I think. And we're down. All right, so that fight, even with me not necessarily playing at my best, that fight went extremely well with this hardware. I didn't really feel like I was missing out on any of the visuals. My gameplay experience didn't really suffer in any sort of meaningful way. Yes, there was a moment where the frames dropped down into the high to mid 40s there, but it was a momentary thing. So yeah, let's find another spot in this game to test that'll give us a different perspective on what this hardware looks like. All right, so for this next leg of gameplay footage, we are traveling to the Jacobs Estate on Eden 6. The opening section of the Jacobs Estate, when you port in, has a section where there's a guaranteed large cluster of mobs that's going to spawn in front of you. So what this is going to do is not only have a lot more going on in terms of just things on the screen, but we're also going to have a lot more mobs that are attacking us at any given time. So as we can see right now, FPS is not looking particularly stellar here. We've actually not even gotten into combat and we're already down into the upper 30s. Ugh, that's not looking too good. But let's see what combat actually looks like. Let's see if I can actually keep pace with what's going on here. Oh god, my aim is horrible right now. Now, the other nice thing about using Moze for this kind of gameplay testing, at least as I have her set up right now, there's a lot of explosions on the screen at any given time, and there's just a lot of stuff to see, especially when you get into Iron Bear. You've got the new HUD that appears, you've got the missiles that start getting thrown all over the place, so that's more for the processor to have to work on. See, now we're dropping down like low 30s here. That could potentially be problematic in areas where there's heavier concentrations of mobs on the screen. Although, I do have to admit, with that being said, I'm still not really having the hardest time keeping pace with this. I mean, yes, you do want the most fluid gaming experience possible, but this isn't something like a Call of Duty title or anything like that, or like a competitive FPS title like CS:GO, where you absolutely must have the highest FPS possible in order to perform reasonably well, especially on a high refresh rate display. Now, admittedly, I have not played this game on a console, so I can't really speak to how much better or worse this would be versus a console. But I'm still maintaining over 30 FPS, and I'm not really noticing a tremendous loss in fidelity by turning everything down. Mostly, again, because I'm playing on a lower resolution, and I'm mostly just focusing on being able to, you know, fight for my life and not die right now. But yeah. Again, if this was all I had to work with for the time being, I really wouldn't have much of a problem with this. And admittedly, while overclocking wouldn't necessarily see tremendous gains here, pushing the graphics card clocks a little bit higher would probably help things a bit here if the silicon will allow for it. Pushing the processor clock speeds up may help a little bit as well. I mean, most of these FX processors, especially the ones that were from a later production run, do see anywhere from 4.8 to 5 gigahertz. So yeah, I would suspect there's maybe a little bit more left in the tank here, but I think that's going to wrap it up for this video. So I'm going to go ahead and ingest this footage, take a closer look at some of the frame rates here, and then we'll talk conclusions. So I guess the takeaway from all of this is that yes, you can play Borderlands 3 at 1080p using just the minimum hardware requirements. Yes, you can get at least north of 30 FPS most of the time you're doing that. Here's the thing though, with the kind of frame rates we're seeing with this, even if you did a bunch of heavy overclocking and got these settings tweaked perfectly, you should still realistically be looking at some kind of platform upgrade at this point. At the very least, upgrade your graphics card. But anyway, hit me up down in the comments below. Let me know what you thought of this content. This is the first time I've done something like this, so any feedback from you all would be greatly appreciated. Let me know if there's some more specific things that you'd like to see in this kind of content, and if there's any other games that have come out in recent history that you'd like to see me do some kind of minimum spec comparison testing on. If I can score inexpensive enough hardware to do that, I'll absolutely check that out for you. So I'm gonna get back to editing together the rest of the video, and I'll catch you guys next time. So take it easy.